Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll make a start with more coming in. And as I said, we've got people online. I wanted to say Bulavanaka, hello, Algeta, bienvenue, and a warm welcome. We're really delighted that you're here with us this afternoon to be part of a conversation. And this is what we really want it to be, a conversation, not presentations, because I think the issue of localisation, and particularly localisation in the Pacific, is way more profound than people giving short talks. We really need to dig into some important issues. So thank you, and I'm really delighted to be here. My name is Helen Durham. I'm the CEO of RedR Australia, and I'm absolutely delighted to share the stage with Talei Tora. And Talei is one of our wonderful RedR deployees, and you've done a number of missions with us, sometimes with Australian Assist, sometimes with others, and we thought it was really, really important to hear her wisdom. But you'll also have a cast of characters that will be beamed in online or in clips from the Pacific, because it really is about listening to the proper voices. But before we got started, and maybe this is because I'm an international lawyer by training, I wanted to spend a moment with the old-fashioned way of putting your hands up, a bit of a poll, because I thought maybe the first issue we're going to discuss is, what is the definition of localisation? Now, sometimes trying to define things, you almost kill it in the definition. But I just wondered if I could ask you to put your hands up if you think this is one of the definitions of localisation. I'll run through 4 of them. The first one is it localisation about employing local people? Is that part of localisation? Yeah, some hands. Great. Who thinks localisation is actually about utilising local resources, supply chain, and keeping it local? Does that have a role in localisation? Good, some more confidence in that. What about listening to local solutions? Anyone think that's a part of localisation? Oh, we're getting more and more. And finally, what about empowerment of grassroots decision makers? Oh, I see a double hand up the back there. Excellent. So thank you. I mean, I think when you read many of the documents, when you see what is articulated globally on this topic, they tend to move into this space, a very early and almost superficial. It's about, it reminds me of the discourse back in the 90s of feminism and international law, add women and mix. It's not add locals and mix. There's something more of a deeper understanding of changing the recipe, so to speak. But before we go any further, because this is not about me, I thought maybe we could hear from our colleague Koila on her definition of localisation.
Thanks for this opportunity to reflect on what I think and feel localisation looks like or feels like now. I suppose for me, like you say, it has been around as a concept. Probably it wasn't named that until very recently, and I believe within the humanitarian space, it gained traction in 2016 with the World Humanitarian Summit. Keeping in mind, I didn't come traditionally from the humanitarian sector, though my field of work and the last 30 years has been towards supporting people, helping people, whether it be counseling, whether it be working with teams to deal with conflict, whether it be teaching in different spaces. One of the things being in the Pacific and being part of the Pacific is this notion we've had to keep dissecting and reframing the whole aspect of power, the whole aspect of who is telling us what to do, and what is the color of their skin, and who is willing to work with us, and to do so in a respectful, dignified way. That's almost like the lens that we carry. And I suppose, over time, as trust builds up and we work in different spaces, the lens come down.
Vanaka, I'm going to ask you, Talei, to reflect on that. I mean, I heard Koila talk about power. I heard her talk about trust. These are complex concepts. When you hear a word that you can sort of slap on things, oh, that's localization or not. What do you think she was saying? And what is the interface with that? And I would say colonialism.
Run that one by me again, Helen, the last one you just said.
The interface with colonialism.
Well, Koila is coming from deep experiences that we face in the Pacific. Pacific peoples and colonialism, varying aspects of how and which power took over our countries or our countries were ceded to, and the experiences that we have and now living with massive colonial hangovers. And when we're talking about power, there are some stories of, the narratives have been told to us that it was peaceful colonialism, and we don't talk about the dark history of colonialism. And since independence for a lot of countries, Fiji in 1970, we had massive colonial hangovers. And so these power structures were given from the British to our people, but then neocolonialism and new power structures then began within our region, and narratives still being told to us of that we then regurgitate. And so these are deep experiences that Koila is referring to in terms of the power struggle and what has been told to us, what the narratives are now. And when we're talking about localization, I still think, first of all, the word localization, where I think it should be locally led. Mm-hmm. Localization is still a top-down approach. Again, still being given to us, and the narrative still being dictated to us. And us, I mean in Pacific peoples of brown color like me.
Well, thank you. And I think that's where we perhaps need to, going forward as the humanitarian sector, or those interested in localization, or even challenge the linguistic construction of locally led, need to think really carefully. Thank you. We're also going to hear from you up there on the screen. Double you. So could I perhaps play your reflections on defining localization?
My name is Talei Tora. I am from Fiji. So for me, as a Fijian woman, as a Pacific woman, I think it's really important the context that we bring in, the experiences, the lived experiences that you can only get having lived in countries like ours. So for me, I have been through natural disasters. During that Cyclone Winston, we lived for over a month without electricity. That's in suburban Suva. And worked in various capacities in roles where we've gone out to assist people who have not had electricity for years, or being connected to the grid for the first time, and understanding the nuances and the stories and the struggles that our people, relatives, some of whom are my own relatives and family, have gone through, and how important this work is, and particularly in comms, in helping our beneficiaries, helping our people get connected to the grid. But I think it's the lived experiences that we bring that kind of grounds us to this work. So I think a blended mode model that we're using right now, in terms of having both internationals and locals being able to deploy not only in the region but to other places, I think it's a good pivot. And the strategic thinking is listening to what the region is calling for more local participation at levels of humanitarian aid work, particularly at the strategic level.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear you on the big screen as well as face-to-face. Can I ask you about that? Because you've added a second layer now. We started off with the definition with Koila about historical construct, about the idea of power, asymmetrical power, who tells whom what to do. And you've now added that next layer, which I would say is about the lived experience. Can you, because I've got you here live, could you unpack that lived experience issue, why you feel it's so important as a starting point? And then it would be great to hear your proposal there about the idea of what really is local and international. But perhaps with the lived experience, why is that so important?
I think, if we go back to the history and how the development of the Pacific, and, all these examples are from me being a Fijian, living in Fiji my whole life, and being a part of a wider family of Pacific people, we've had atrocious histories and stories of how development and aid has been brought in for us. And so when you're talking about lived experiences, and it's always been top down, we're still actually facing it as we speak. Now, when you're talking about lived experiences, first of all, you're coming into my country and making assumptions about what we need with solutions that you have deemed fit for us, and in manners that you see fit in terms of, let's just say, humanitarian aid, it should be distributed. But we have our own local systems. We have governments led by our own people, voted in democratically by our own people, and tried and tested models in terms of humanitarian aid that we develop through the assistance, of course, of aid agencies. But these cyclones are experienced by our people, and we've been experienced from the time our first settlers arrived in country. And when you're talking about the lived experiences, we know the hardships that our people face because we are also facing these hardships. And it's the same when we talk about the disability sector. It should be nothing about us and our communities without us. So when we're talking about localization, my question that I would like to pose is, first of all, with all of these localization policies, who informed them? Were we a part of that process?
Thank you. I think they're the big questions. So adding on to this idea of lived experience, it's not just that you've lived experience and you've suffered there. It's about the depth of knowledge about understanding the experiences that are coming. And I must admit, just my own, I found it really, really interesting recently when I was in the Pacific and I was talking to a colleague who deals with grassroots NGOs in Tonga. And she was talking about the fact that if any of you here have ever been to a Tongan wedding or funeral, they're an extraordinary coordinated event with the whole community involved. But then the communities get told you can't organise yourself with a natural disaster. So how do we sometimes take, because maybe sometimes you can't see what the lived experience, you don't know what you don't know. So humanitarian organisations come in and say, we're going to help you, we're going to capacity build, which I think is a really terrible term. I think we have to get rid of capacity building. It's got to be capacity sharing. Or as Koela constantly reminds me, it's about co-creation. But how do you get the intrinsic capacity for people for thousands of years, as you say, have dealt with these issues? What you're saying is that if that information isn't embedded in the construction of the idea of localization, we're missing out. Is that what you're telling me?
Absolutely. Like when we talk about, so for in the Pacific, our big crisis is usually natural disasters, whether it be cyclones, droughts, tsunamis, now sea level rise. Our people had their own traditional methods of preparing for disasters. Our people read clouds. We have birds that tell us there's impending bad weather. And there are, organizations in the Pacific, locally led organizations now and agencies that are embedding quite purposefully traditional knowledge with science. Because our people have known for centuries that there's an impending cyclone. They know how to save water. They know how to save food. But we, for a really long time, have only been going down the science model on you will dig the borehole, you will use a water tank, versus how did our people previously look for water if the water sources were salinated? Yeah. And so, again, it's going back to what we say in Fijian is looking to the past to inform the future. But it's a collaborative process. And it's ensuring that these local solutions from our own people, because we have survived these disasters. We are still surviving. It's like when you talk about the Pacific and sea level rise, we're not drowning, we're swimming.
Thank you. Now I'm going to throw it open to the audience, because the conversation isn't just a conversation up here. And I know sometimes it's shy, so I might even pick on you if I'll be a fair but firm chair. I want to throw it to you about any reflections that you've had or you wanted to share on the definition of localisation. We're still talking about the definition, the construct. It's a word we hear everywhere. We almost all be walking around with T-shirts saying we believe in localisation, but what does that T-shirt actually mean? I was wondering if I could ask you if that's a bit, yeah, you're front of this. I know you said you're going to be brave and sit at the front, but
Thank you so much. I'm Veronique. I'm a researcher working for the Humanitarian Policy Group at ODI. I actually have maybe a controversial view of what localization means. And I think we do need to distinguish between local leadership, local action, and localization. Because I think localization is a problem that sits in the international humanitarian and disaster response system. It's a bit like colonization. For me, saying that localization is not about the international system and how it behaves, it's saying that colonization was not about the colonizer. Mm-hmm. So, and one of the things that I've liked about what a lot of organizations actually in Australia have talked about was to get out of the space that wasn't theirs as part of their effort towards localization. So I see localization as international or external actors that take a space that maybe is not theirs in a way that is undermining local leadership and local action, which has always happened, continues happening, and will continue happening. But it's diminishing, undermining those local capacities, local efforts, local knowledge that's already there, that's always been there. So for me, localization is rethinking the role of external actors in how they engage with what's already there, whether that's local coordination, government action, civil society organization, communities, and what they're already doing, not undermining, but facilitating, supporting, and helping in their own terms.
Well, thank you. And what a bonus that I had you sitting up the front. That was great. I like that saying, get out of spaces that are not theirs. And I think, yes, on this week has gone a blur, but on Monday we had a session on the interface between private companies and the humanitarian sector. And someone raised the point, it's not just about setting up an office. It's not just about sort of plonking an office there. It's actually something more profound than that. After such a fabulous comment from the floor, is anyone else interested? I'm going to look around. I'm going to take two more. Oh, excellent. Please, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alison Hall. I'm the founder of a small NGO working with village communities in northern Uganda. And I just want to start off by saying thank you, because this week I've been going to every session which has localization in the title. And there was one where I asked one of the speakers, what is local? And I really hope she's not here. Sorry. But there was a lot of money, there was a lot of research. When I said, but what is local? She said, do you know, I don't know the answer to that. So you're bringing it up and discussing it and having it here, I think is really great. And I absolutely love what you just said about looking to the past to inform the future. So I suppose a question maybe is, in the communities that we're working with in northern Uganda, they're coming out of the back end of a 20-year war where all of that past knowledge was not being passed from generation to generation. So how do we make them responsible and empowered to make their decisions for the future when we're losing that lost local knowledge? I think so. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but thank you.
A bit of both, but I'll pass it to my esteemed guest here to respond to that, or maybe just take you to one more comment. But thank you. I mean, it's not always easy to come to an event like this and actually try and go, but let's go a level deeper. Let's really go a level deeper. So thank you for that compliment. I saw that hand, and then we'll pass it over for your reflections.
Yes, just a question. Thank you. I'm Isabelle de Muser from OCHA, and I'm also the lead here at the HNPW of the inclusion area of common concern. But the question that I had is that, so I'm not very much engaged in localization, so forgive me if my question is a bit candid, but humanitarians usually don't work in a vacuum in a country, but they like working with national disaster management authorities because it makes it easier also to bring everyone together. So I'm wondering whether there is not also an issue about organizing the civil society around local-led action before the disaster happens, so that when there is a disaster, the NDMA would also be in a stronger position to defend the locally led action versus the incoming humanitarian actors. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to throw it over to you, Talei, to first answer or think about the question of how do you actually hold on to local knowledge? Because if we think local knowledge is intrinsically important, how do you hold on to it in a fast-moving world where there's so many factors trying to strip it? And then secondly, the idea of sort of a deeper connection with civil society and the I would say in the Pacific, the NDMOs, the National Disaster Authorities.
You know, with local knowledge and tradition and culture, and traditions and how it's passed on, it's those conversations that need to keep happening. Whether it's a hurtful past, it's a bright future, but and with like a lot of groundwork that I had mentioned previously in what's happening in the Pacific, is trying to take these lived experiences, these cultures, these traditions, and embedding it into the work. Because Pacific peoples are the culture, Pacific peoples are the traditions. We are not one, we are one and the same. And by the organizations trying to find local solutions that are informed by these experiences, informed by these local traditions, it's respecting the culture. It's, a colleague of mine brought this up in her panel. It's respecting the access that has been given of thousands of years of living off the land, surviving in the ocean, traversing oceans, understanding the moon and the stars. When Captain Cook came into the Pacific, we had already traversed thousands of miles, and information coming out now is that we ended up in Mexico. Our Pacific peoples were navigators. The mats, we have one in the front, weaved by a Fijian diaspora staying here and working here in Geneva. Weaved mats that were sails and that could catch wind. And you know, and nowadays we're using computers and all to do this, but these are memories that are being that we're trying to incorporate into the work. But if organizations come in and understand the traditions or try to work with the structures that are in place, understand and have respect for the access that's given, because access is so important. Relationship building with communities. And if localization or locally led solutions is going to work, it's understanding these pre-existing structures, understanding the respect that is needed. So, you know, I had this one issue once with this organization that I worked for, with doing comms, stories of pro-poor growth. I had issues with it because I said they're not poor, they're just living in a village. They're actually more richer than us. They have way more resources than us and traditional knowledge on how to survive. You leave me in the forest, I'm not sure I'll last a day. These people, and so, you know, for me, I think in terms of it's embedding that knowledge into the work. It's not the easiest to do, but it's having the respect that knowledge is not always in a book. And in the Pacific, it's oral, it's through our dance, it's through our words, it's through talanoas like this, it's through these intricate relationships.
Thank you. And I think that also indirectly answers this question about the use of civil society with the authorities, because the interface.
And you know, with
if I may use Fiji as an example, like the civil society organizations are predominantly led by local Fijians, local actors that have had years of experience working in communities and are community engagement specialists. And our system of preparedness, the government relies a lot on the civil society organizations to do this groundwork, because government's job is to run the business and try and run the country and make money, particularly after COVID. Fiji is still recovering, the Pacific is still recovering. And so it's these locally led CSOs that have been entrusted to carry on this work and do this work quite well. And in Fiji's case, when we were the first to have a Category 5 cyclone, it was the CSOs that worked very well with the NDMO and the government to get resources out very quickly to their communities, because they know their communities. They know when one road is blocked, they know how to get there through another access. And that relationship building, though, is very important. But again, it's the whole respect and understanding that these people are the people on the ground. You don't have 1,000 hands. Let them do their job because they know better about what they're doing.
Well, thank you. I think we might move on now. So thank you. Thank you for the fantastic input. And I know, I'm sorry if people wanted to more, but I wanted to move on to hearing from another colleague of ours, Vuli, on traditional knowledge and sovereignty.
From both parties, the local responder have got to appreciate and understand, the amount of resources it took to mobilize people to come into your country, let alone get the resources into your community at the fastest, most possible time. And sometimes when you have to just say yes, 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 to allow these resources to come in, without understanding, the mechanism that's driving this assistance. In many cases, people can travel 2 or 3 days from Europe, for example, to get here, because they are a specialist in a particular field that is needed in that particular response. Simple things like, meeting them, understanding the context, and get them to contribute as quick as possible in the most effective way without creating any more hindrance into their work. And on the flip side of that, it's the people that are coming into host countries' environment, so to appreciate that there is sovereignty in any disaster context. And it's paramount, and it doesn't matter how much or how expensive your resources are. The host country and the local agencies, those community volunteers, they own the response. It's theirs, and also the knowledge that is needed for the transmission of relief to be provided in the most effective way lies with them. So it's appreciation of both assistance. And those things can be achieved mainly from experience by training, exercises, exchange visits. The host nations are given an opportunity to understand your assistance. And I'm not saying it's not being done. It's being done for years in the Pacific. Many exercises, simulation have been done where international actors were brought in, and then the challenge lies in the retention of those knowledge within institutions. It's an ongoing thing. We can only do so much in terms of spending more time building networks. We should invest more time in getting to know each other. The other thing is that the Pacific rich in traditions and cultures, and many of these should be maintained. And whenever response is designed, that they should uphold these traditions and values that these communities and their ancestors have lived with for so long.
Well, I'll let Vuli know that actually from the audience, many of his points had already been raised, so it's wonderful. I wanted to come back to you for a second and dig in a little bit to the statement made that the response, they own the response. It's an interesting statement looked in the construct of localization. Do local communities own the response? Are they recipients of the response? Are they actors in the response? What did Vuli mean there?
I think, preparation for this, we talked about sovereignty. What does sovereignty mean? And the sovereignty that's taken away when people are in crisis. And when you're talking about owning the response, and again, this is coming from local humanitarians that have been in response efforts where it feels like we don't own the response. But again, it's respecting, like for agencies and working with, like if you have a localization policy and you have agencies in the country, you would have local people strategically leading your response, with 1 or 2 experts being flown in for the response, working with the structures, the NDMO, the government ministries are there because they own the response. Their people, our people, are the ones that are devastated. But it's having that respect that because we're in a time of crisis, it doesn't water down our independence, it doesn't water down our sovereignty, it doesn't water down our histories and our knowledge on how to respond and how to get to our people and understand their needs. And I think that's where Vuli is coming from. And it's coming from places where you hear some of the stories in terms of, we talked about innovative solutions in, again, I keep referring to natural disasters because that's what I'm used to in our region, but innovative solutions. And I said, there's time and space for it, but not necessarily at the first response of a natural disaster. Because the first response and the first job of government is to get to the most devastated and to make sure that they have the basic needs, food, shelter, and water.
So with that ownership, I'm interested in the temporal pace, because I think the other thing that Vuli said was about the time to get you. So can you just set up quickly and having a local interface, or does it go back to your issue about access and the issue about the time it takes to get the trust, to get the access? Like, if there's ownership, what about the temporal pace?
Well, in natural disasters, you are right. There is an urgency, and the access is given by working through the NDMO, working with the provincial councils, who actually, by the time you get there, have all this information for you. You don't, as agencies, it's in Fijian culture anyway, and in more specific cultures, you are not allowed actually just to go into our communities. There are protocols to follow. The gatekeepers are the provincial councils.
Okay, so there's layers of protocol that sometimes would be unsaid. I've often thought, working globally, you've got to listen to the silences as much as what is surfaced up.
But there are protocols when everyday circumstances, but this is the time of natural disaster, natural crisis. And so what would every day happen is, if you want to go into a village, you've got to take cover, you've got to do a presentation, and there's speeches and all of that, and then they grant you access. But in this time, it's almost like the government grants the access, but the access into this is still the NDMO or the Emergency Operations Center.
So there's still an infrastructure. It doesn't go. Sovereignty doesn't disappear, as you say. It's just different, and it has to be pre-existing.
And, authentically, if we're talking about like authenticity in terms of localization, agencies would know this if you had strategic locals leading this response.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, it's almost circular, a virtuous circle. Thank you. That's great. I'm wondering if we move on maybe to the next issue. We'll move on to our colleagues about disaster management, and our lovely colleague, Penna, who is currently just returning from the Solomon Islands, I think, having done a piece of really important work around electoral monitoring. Love to hear what he says in a very, experienced way about some of the things to think through when you look at localisation and disaster management. So let's hear from Penna.
When you talk about localization in the humanitarian context or humanitarian sector, this is my personal opinion. 4 key elements that we need to keep in mind. The first one is empowering, to empower local responders and tapping into this local knowledge, or letting them know that this thing will help your already pre-existing knowledge. The second point is strengthening. We have to strengthen the capacity and the resources of local organization or local responders or communities, strengthen their pre-existing knowledge and elements. The third point, I think, it's delivering, successfully deliver our programs, talking about the quality of our programming, how suitable it is to the local context, keeping in mind that we have to know or understand that there's already pre-existing knowledge and systems in place. Don't bring in and force new things. Just walk around the pre-existing knowledge, pre-existing systems. And the last thing, which is one of the key elements to localization, is sustainability. By engaging these local actors, we are ensuring that our programs will be sustainable in the long run after we left. When our program finishes, we are content that our programs have been absorbed into the pre-existing knowledge, have been absorbed into this organization or countries, and they will use them. So yeah, I think those are the 4 key things about localization in Fiji and also in the Pacific.
Thank you. I love things in lists. I think it must be in my brain. But having 4 key things from what he said, from what Penna said: tap into local knowledge, strengthen or build on or build with capacity. Is it suitable? And finally, the issue of sustainability. And then I wanted to, as you mentioned this, and I wanted to go back to it, and maybe then I'm going to open to the audience. And once again, if people don't put their hands up, I'm going to pick on you. So have a think. This idea about innovation and localization, I'm really interested. It hadn't hit me until we started having these conversations recently. Because in the sector, we're always being told, innovate, there's better ways, more efficient, there's faster, there's cheaper. And I do think, for example, the interface in learning from other sectors is really, really important. But what I keep hearing, and certainly when I sit with communities, I hear deeply, is that bringing in a brand new shiny thing that doesn't suit the environment actually doesn't help much. Having said that, surely there's a space at times to allow for innovation, and maybe it's the innovation within the community that has to be seized. But how do we square that round hole of new, old, traditional knowledge and efficiency and effectiveness?
Like introducing anything new, like I always go back to what informed that decision, what informed that process to think that, for instance, you must build capacity or share knowledge and introduce a new system in the way humanitarian aid, for instance, is delivered in the Pacific. I mean, what informed that is my question. So, and with that information gathering, did it involve local actors? Or is it because it worked in somewhere like the Caribbean and therefore they have the same color, they have the same ocean, they have the same colors, weather, it must be the same. Because that's what the British did to us in terms of indentured laborers. If it worked in the Caribbean, it's going to work in Fiji. Not understanding the culture and the traditions and the chiefly system that we have. But again, so I'm not averse to innovation or they places and time, but again, I always ask this question: it's informed by who and by what? What made you think that we needed a better, more efficient way? Is this not working? Did we tell you it's not working, or did you think that this way is better? I mean, that's what I always ask. Again, it has to be informed by, and it's not just because you've got the budget to do it and you've got to spend it. And then you end up working it, which happens in Fiji all the time, happens across the region. You work with the wrong local actors who do not have the capacity or the means to roll it out. And there's zero sustainability, but you tick the box.
Yeah, so it's that interface between something being new and shiny, something being new and important. And your question is, it's important and potentially useful if foundationally it was created in a way that was sensitive to the local environment. So it doesn't stop new things. It just has to be, as you said, who was at the table, who decided it's needed. I'm going to throw it open to the audience because I think this is an important point, because this is where you have almost an intersectionality of ideas. have the slogan, let's go local, let's learn from the private, let's be more efficient, let's be innovative. And within all these elements, sometimes there are tension. Humanitarian principles have tension in them too. Humanity and impartiality, neutrality. So any reflections from the floor about innovation, keeping the sector authentic to what it needs to do, but also moving forward? Yes, please, sir. Please introduce yourself too.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Deo Gracias Chigude. I work with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team based out of Uganda. My thoughts actually on localization are quite wide, and I think for me the first thing about localization would be, I know we're speaking at organizational levels because we're here representing large organizations and international organizations, but I think localization starts individually. As an individual, what are you looking at in terms of localization? How do you value it? You will be mentioning about local knowledge, local action, right? But do you as an individual, or does your organization as an entity value that local knowledge, right? Because sometimes you come to events and people saying, oh yeah, I'm an expert of a place and I've only read about it in books and published papers about it, but they've not even lived the experience, but they're already calling themselves experts, right? The person that is living the experience, and I told you I've lived the experience, like, oh yeah, that's our local partner. We work with them, but they don't consider them the people that have lived the experience as specialists, as experts of the experience they've lived in. So I think that's something we need to look back. First of all, valuing localization, saying that it's something that, above all, we want to do individually, but also as an organization. But to tap in the point you've raised about innovation, which is another big, humanitarian conversation that gets a bit tricky, right? Most times people, like you mentioned, most people think innovation means shiny, new, amazing, fancy. Or the word AI comes up immediately now, right? Everyone says AI innovation. But I do think for me, one of the things I always look at with innovation is that the person who usually innovates something is not necessarily the person that has to either scale it up. If you look at even the technology that we actually use, the smartphone, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the people that actually innovated them are usually like quirky, people like being alone, but that they're giving us a tool that we, the users, become experts. So one of the things I've always mentioned with people within the humanitarian space is that if the innovation you are giving to someone, the person that has received that innovation doesn't become an expert, it will never scale, right? The person that made YouTube is not a YouTube expert. He doesn't even, I think, use YouTube, I'm told, right? Like, it's like even fears videos. But the people that he gave YouTube before became better at it, improved it, and grew. So as you introduce a new way, new method, you should be looking at, okay, am I creating, will I have to be the person that takes it further? And that's someone mentioned, leaving the space for others to grow, right? But also as you're leaving the space, I do think finally, and I've spoken a lot, finally, before even you leave the space or the chair or the table, whatever metaphor you're putting out there, try to inspire someone to actually take it up. Because if you say, oh, I'm walking away, you are walking away, but someone else just come and take it, right? Like the next person who was waiting to take your chair will take it even before the person who you want to take it or give it to takes it. So before you actually walk away, I would say, first of all, inspire someone to actually come and take it from you or take it up when you do leave, as opposed to saying, hey, you know what, I'm being local, I'm doing localization, I'm walking away and I'm saying bye, right? So yeah, those are my points, my thoughts. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I think we almost need another slogan. In innovation in humanitarian work, user experience has to be located in it. I think that could be something, but thank you for those reflections. I think you were nodding your head frantically, so I hear that there's a connection. Any other points before we move on? Yes, please. The gentleman here.
Hi, I'm a digital engagement specialist and spent a lot of my career working in that innovation space, in the communications and technology space, and that naturally led to intersections with the innovation space and working with a lot of humanitarian innovations that, in my somewhat now jaded experience, mostly turned out to be largely solutions looking for a problem. A lot of bright people at hackathons came up with concepts, or R&D people at technology companies came up with concepts that they decided would be great for the humanitarian sector if they could figure out how to sell it to them. And I've watched so many of these innovations wither and die at the local level, precisely because they're not from the local level. They're not adapted to the local needs. And it seems like the conversation around innovation needs to pivot 180 degrees and start local and say, okay, what do the local communities do to solve these problems? Maybe the innovation that we need to be looking at is innovating the way we do things to be more in line with the way they're already doing things, rather than teaching them new skills and new ways. Maybe it's the innovation is in adapting the traditional methods.
Beautiful. I'm going to throw it to you in a minute because I can hear there's lots of agreement up here, and I love that idea. The inversion of the dominant paradigm. We're thinking we can bring localization to humanitarianism. Maybe humanitarianism needs to go back to localization, and particularly in innovation, what you're saying. Now, I saw another hand over here. Yes.
Actually, I was going to say very similar to my colleague here. I'm Zara Didu. I work for Action Aid UK as the Climate and Resilience Advisor. And we're often coming in conversations with donors who are really pushing this innovation and scaling up thing. And for us our main approach is to empower local communities, and particularly working with women-led organisations, women rights organisations. So it's very much trying to work from the local scale. And for us, it's just really difficult to see like how do we frame what we do as innovation, because this assumption that innovation is this new panacea that's just going to solve everything. But we need to look at what's already working, but it doesn't necessarily sound like innovation. It's simply empowering communities, and like similar to what he was saying. So just.
Thank you. Now I feel I need to pass it over to you because otherwise you're going to explode with agreement.
I think again, it's circling back the answers that we're sharing, and we love this. In our country or in our side of the Pacific, we call this talanoring. It's the sharing, and we're creating these connections. And we're sharing. I'm sharing a bit of my culture. You're sharing a bit of your experience. And we're richer for it. But it's circling back to the informed process. And innovation is good. Innovation is great. But again, when it comes to informing the process and what works best for the people and the capacity. Usually, after disasters in the region, it's just about bread and butter issues. These people have no homes. When Fiji was hit in 2016, the Cyclone Winston, our people are still devastated till today. They didn't build back better. They went straight back into corrugated roofing, iron homes. That was what the government could afford at that point in time, but it was about providing shelter. Then, the advent of social media, locals are saying, why didn't they build these type of houses? They said, again, but local solutions being informed. Did the community want those type of houses? Fiji is a hot place. Are container homes best for us? But these are some of the solutions that were brought to the table. But again, I think we can agree with the fact that there have to be locally led solutions. They have to inform. Our people have to say, actually, yes, this is a problem, through the proper channels with the NDMO and the government, informed by community leaders, informed by community feedback, to then work together with these solutions to then tailor-make to what's best for us. What's best for Fiji, not necessarily work in Tonga, will not necessarily work in Vanuatu, will not work for people in Brazil. And I think when the humanitarian world starts looking at that, as our friend said, to have a pivot and almost relook at itself in terms of the help that we're trying to do, I hope it'll be much better for it. And it's a bigger, broader conversation that we need to have. But I think we can agree on that it has to be locally led. And when we talk about localization, it has to be authentic. There's one spectrum about including locals, but are you including us at a strategic place where we can make decisions for ourselves with the pay package and the agency? Because I can tell you that you're giving us the jobs, you're not giving us the agency that you gave to my predecessor that was an expat, and you're certainly not giving us the pay. We talk about pay equity, but Helen and I we can talk about this till we go to Fiji, come back, and we'll play.
We have great chats about this, and it's incredible.
It's about authenticity. That's what we believe. It's about authenticity. To really look at what localization means. It's not just it's been used so much during this week. But when we break it up, what does it mean? Is it just including people, local people, so that they can be actors, or are we truly giving us or local people the agency and the support and the finance and the big bucks that comes with it to make these changes and to inform these changes? Thanks, Ed.
No, it's beautiful. And may I say, just as RedR does very well. So you're not talking about RedR in this. But these topics you can only move forward when you have the proper discussion. It's really important. So let's move on from that. Let's move to our next guest. And it's Simi, and he's going to talk a little bit about disability inclusion, because whilst we are focusing on localization, we thought it was really important that you can't, in many ways, separate 14% of the population when you're talking about this issue. So let's hear from Simi.
For me, first and foremost, you see the person with disability as just another person that's a member of your own community. And look beyond the impairment of the person. I think that's really the first step, and it's the most easiest step towards inclusion, in which you don't see the person's impairment, but you see that person as a person. And the second one is talk to the people with disability. They are the best people to be able to tell us what is needed to be done around disability inclusion. That's at an individual level, and also at a national level. You have organizations of people with disabilities that are led by people with disabilities themselves. Talk to them around what do they need, what are the challenges that they face on a daily life, what are the things that you can bring to help in terms of enabling their participation in society. For me, those are the first two steps, which does not cost money. It costs just a little bit of change in attitudes around how you approach disability inclusion. Because once you have that, you'll be able to realize that this person with disability has the same right as I am in this society. Then that means this person needs to have access to education. This person needs to be in an evacuation center. And also for me, I'll be able to walk into and change after I had a shower in an evacuation center. So that means also ensuring that there's a space for the person with disability to do the same in privacy. There is quite a lot of political will at the moment around disability inclusion. A lot of leaders are saying we are doing this on disability inclusion. We are planning to do this on disability inclusion. But for me, put a challenge out there is people need to put money where their mouth is. At the moment, the budget that's dedicated towards disability inclusion is not enough. There needs to be more budget allocated towards disability inclusion of people with disabilities.
Well, thank you, Simi. I think that was actually really profound in the way he cut up the difference. And I wanted to hear your reflections on this. The difference between the things that you can do that don't cost money, which is really about a mind frame shift. And it is, I think it's complicated to see someone as a holistic person isn't intrinsic to give them respect. But we also need, often in the segregated data, you need to understand. So how you, once again, see beyond a person's impairment, see them as a person, but also take into account for probably operational needs, the different types in the community. So I really like the fact that he challenged us about look at us as people, And then the second one, the money issue. So while there's some things you can do without money, there is something raw about having the right budget, which can come with dignity, the capacity to have privacy. Really simple, I would say, but taken for granted basic dignity. How do you see these two issues? One about the way you change your mind of how you see someone, and the other about how you support them.
Changing mindsets, looking what we say, looking beyond the chair, looking at the person's ability and not their disability. But I've attended workshops, I've attended training. That took money, mind you, to support. It's still going to come back to the money. And awareness on disability inclusion in the work that we do in communications, in the humanitarian sector, in the private sector. So, in order to change mindsets, particularly around Western concepts of inclusion, you can also still look to the past to inform the future. Like, how did our communities care for persons with disabilities? What is already embedded within the society in terms of the caring mechanism, in terms of how we care for our elderly? We don't put our elderly in aged care homes. It's non-existent in our region, in our side of the world. We care for our elderly until, and it's the same with persons with disabilities. But changing the mind frame or the mindset, it takes a lot of work. And again, you'll come back to the budget, what he's saying. You need to be purposeful and you need to balance it out. But one is working with agencies like ours, working within the humanitarian sector, and making sure that everybody's on the same page. But then that learning too, that has to be given to the community.
Mm-hmm. So once again, the virtuous circle. So thank you. I think that's really important because there is no doubt that there is a wider surfacing and understanding of these issues. So it's great to hear. I actually was just reminded from my colleagues over there that I haven't been taking questions. I've got some questions online, which is always good. I'm sorry for those online. We do love you. We just are having a conversation here. But I do first see, perhaps I'll pass it back to you. We'll do a round. If there's anyone who wanted to comment or engage on this topic, let's give it a go. So over to you.
So this is a specific question about you're saying learn from the past to inform the future, people with disabilities. So where you come from, it's great, but what do you say to organisations who work with communities where children and people with disabilities are hidden and they're shoved away and they're not there? So how do we address that, where we say, no, we need to include them, but the people in the local communities are saying, no, we hide them and we tie them to trees?
And again, it's using local structures in terms of informing the community, talking with communities. In the Pacific, we're predominantly patriarchy. So I'll use a fantastic example from Vanuatu, where they use the nakamal system. One organization is using the nakamal, which is a drinking hut, predominantly frequented by men, where they drink kava, our traditional drink in the Pacific. They use this setting to have conversations around inclusion and persons with disabilities. It is not always welcome, like you said, in communities, for whatever reason or whatever experiences that has happened. And not, and for them it's working in terms of behavior change. There are other organizations that have actually taken this learning and around disability inclusions, around caring for persons with disabilities during, prior to, or after a natural disaster. And they've seen behavior change. But again, it's going out to the communities and helping them understand, but using these embedded community structures to have these conversations. And it's not easy work, it's hard work, and it's ongoing work, and we're still trying to get it right. Simeone brought in a very important experience there with evacuation centers. Usually they're just schools, put everybody together. There are now considerations now through the NDMO working with their provincial councils that there are special considerations for persons with disabilities and including LGBTQI and having separate bathrooms. But that's taken a long time to get there. And that came through help with agencies, humanitarian agencies, UN agencies, and the training, which was then mainstreamed and embedded into. But that work has to then go back down to the people. And it's continuous conversations, but again, it's using the structures that already pre-exist inside. And it's going to still take a lot of work. Like we live in a patriarchy society, women are still at the brunt of terrible behavior. So you've got that happening. And then in this whole other, in terms of intersectionality, what's happening with persons with disabilities. And then there's the whole cross-section of persons with mental disabilities. And how what happens to them in times of natural disasters is exacerbated. And we have atrocious stories, and it was not, they didn't mean it, but the whole village evacuated and forgot that there was somebody that was unable to move. And they're evacuating in the middle of the night, and sometimes it's because there's a tsunami that's hit. But again, it comes back down to working with the CEOs whose mandate it is to do this work in the field. And also it comes back again to what Simi said, providing that budget so they can reach the last mile people, so they can educate them. And hopefully the response, the preparedness and the recovery is better for it.
And I think that issue about how you actually change or challenge some of the traditional structures that don't take into account inclusion, and it's the how, not the what. And it's the, as you were saying, finding the internal methods that are more able to get traction because it's sitting in a drinking hut and talking about it. Many years ago, I was an international lawyer in the Pacific, and I had to get states or work to get states ratify treaties. And I found if I could sit with the local communities and find stories of their own experiences, it was such a better entry point than me coming and saying you need this human right. So I think it's a really profound issue how you can push against some of these inequalities through using the existing structures. So thank you for that. I have a couple of questions here or comments, and I think it's important that I read them out. The first one was really related to participatory grant making, and the question or the sort of comment, if you have participatory grant making, will it help sustain localisation and shared decision making? And I'll hold that there for a second for you to have a think about. I think, from what I've been listening, we're having our great chats together all the time. I do think that having at the start a way that the grant making can be done where there's more participation has to be a good thing, but I'll refer that to you in a second. And then the other one, it's rather long, I'm just trying to read it. It says, lots of misconceptions are in place regarding the definition of localisation under the Rohingya refugee response, Bangladesh. Several INGOs have taken national level registration and also claim local organisations simultaneously with some national level organisations having countrywide activity. They also claim local organisations. So that sentence is obviously about the different layers and authenticity. On the other hand, local-led organisations claim they have district and sub-district level registration as the actual local organisation. The conflict of definition of localisation in this situation remains in the NGO platforms. Do you have any suggestions on how to minimise the conflict and set up reasonable definitions of localisation? I think in summary, that question obviously circles back around who claims to speak for whom in localisation, and when big INGOs or big organisations come in claiming to be local, how do you cross-examine that? How do you stress test that? So the first question is in relation to participatory grant making, and the second one comes back to the things we've been talking about, which is definition.
What your first question is around what's the word, sorry?
Grant making participation. So the capacity when the grants are being given to have people participating in deciding where the money goes and how the grant is framed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I thought it was an easy one for you. I would imagine, but you always surprise me, so it's good.
With coming from a region with a lot of money that gets pumped in with grants, and 3/4 of the time it's the incapacity of local organizations to meet the requirements. Was it actually written for us, or is there money and budget to spend? And so there has been lots of work done in the space of grant writing, understanding how grants are delivered, and also being able to meet the requirements. But again, that, it comes back to budget and enabling that to happen. But you are right. In terms of when grants are proposed, or when agencies come in with grants, again, is it informed by local issues? Is it informed by local problems? And are there agencies on the ground or NGOs on the ground that are able to deliver this?
Yeah.
Or is it, again, it's not authentic. It's just ticking a box to say we worked with the organization, but the sustainability will not be there. Again, it's being informed, again, by local grassroots people, or in this case, local CSOs who know best and have representation of their community members. Represent the community members. With regards to yours...
With the second question, I think it's a really interesting one, and I know we're actually coming up to time because we wanted to finish at 1:15. But the second question, I think, comes back to what we've been talking about the whole hour and a quarter, which is definition. And I think, in a way, you just put a label of localization at what level? What is local? Is it at the district level, at the more local level? I don't think, in a way, there was a question, but it was more a comment about an example where there obviously is organizations or institutions that keep claiming local, but in fact, it's more at a mixed level. So I think we'd have to go back to the start on that one.
Again, and I think I'm circling back to this again, it's about the authenticity. Like I said, it's been so widely used over this week. It's widely used in the humanitarian sector. And a lot of times, I think it's just a box-ticking activity. It's not authentic. And when you're talking about, we had a conversation the other day when somebody said, I'm actually developing the localization strategy. And I was like,
and you do a good look like that. You do a good look.
With whom? Or who is informing this work? If it's, and I'm going to take this term, but nothing about us without us.
Yeah.
If you're going to want to purposefully work with local people have to inform the process. Local people have to be engaged in the process from the outset, at the onset.
Moving forward.
It's not come with your policy, because then it's just that whole top-down approach. Just in a different mechanism, using a new buzzword, which has a lot of money being pumped into it, and is a box-ticking exercise. It's not authentic.
Yeah, and moving forward, how we can do this better. Yes. I did have another question here, but actually plays into our next and final speaker up here. It was a question about sustainability, and someone had written in asking, the most challenging aspect for localization is the sustainability. How can localization be more sustainable? And I'd like to go back to our dear colleague Koila and hear from her on this question.
So, you work with people and you strengthen their capacity, or they strengthen yours, and they move. And moving is a good thing. However, I say to people, move with responsibility, because when you move, there's a gap left behind. Make sure you equip people to fill that gap, so when you move, life continues. Unfortunately, some people move and they do it without thinking that way. It comes back to values. It comes back to appreciating the level of capacity that's within the organization. And it's more critical now because we're leaving in huge numbers to Australia, New Zealand, wherever, because opportunities have opened up. The organization and the countries feel it a lot more, There's the push-pull factor, right? What can we change to encourage them to stay? Or how can we look at this differently, right? So that you don't lose them, they come back still as volunteers, or they're still offer to be technical assistance to mentor the new person who's coming in. So you don't end in a bad way. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We don't want anything to end in a bad way. And the final discussion I'd love to have with us, and we could go on for a long time, or we won't, because it's been a long week and we've got lots of other things to do, is this idea. And I think it's quite, in a way, we are looking at if localisation becomes extremely successful, how do we make sure that we give people the freedom and the encouragement to move from being in their own local communities to out to other opportunities, leaving that hole behind? But of course, from a human right, you can't stop people moving. And I know within RedR Australia, we encourage our colleagues to be able to deploy and move. So how do we circle that square again? That's the theme, I think, when you look at localisation in different ways, between having, I think, what Koila was answering, which was the question online, and I love how everything does come back. The issue about sustainability is about making sure you capacity share with the people around you as you're learning. But what are your reflections on that? I know there's some really great things to talk about also about conditions and ensuring that individuals are treated with equity and equality. But love to hear your views on that, about moving on and not leaving gaps behind.
Something just came to me, and that was honestly, when agencies are talking about, or humanitarian agencies, or most agencies, it's across the private sector, through everywhere. It's the buzzword right now, localization. I'd really like to understand, just to really, what's the end state? What's to get more brown people, more local people to what? And so when you're talking about the brain drain, with humanitarian sector side, that brain drain is because, well, what's the starting rate in Australia and New Zealand for a waiter? What is it, $18, $22 Australian? It's $4 Fijian at home. That's the minimum wage. That's a whole nother conversation with our government and in terms of what the private sector can pay, but they're going to lose out. Now, but when you're talking about positions of power and making change, and a lot of our agencies still have it very expat-led at the top, and the minions at the bottom are the locals that go out to the communities, etc., etc. So when you're talking about localization, what are the succession plans that one day you'll have a local Fijian sitting up there, and then you build their capacity, and there's succession plans to come up that it's going to keep going down, and that you will come in, the donor agencies and agencies will come in with your expertise, share, build capacity, go back, but we'll still. When's that going to happen? So when I'm asking the end state, is that what we want to see? Is that part of this localization? Is that where it's moving? Or is it, again, a box-ticking exercise? Because in a lot of cases, that's still not happening at the strategic level, where we're given that agency and that budget to say, yep, this is how I think it should be done. I've been informed by this X, Y, Z. So that's why, again, what's the whole end state of this?
I think that is a very good question. And do you know what is so great in having a discussion is often you work out the right questions. And I think we've talked a bit at the start about how you define localization. And I think at the end we say, well, what are we looking for in localization? Is it impact? Is it a better impact? Is it a better grounding and sustainability? Is it about changing our mind frame and walking the talk and not just ticking boxes, but actually having difficult or interesting, engaging, authentic conversations? So thank you. I love finishing on a question. My lovely colleague who you heard from, Koila, she said to me the other day, Helen, the most important thing about localization to me, it's like weaving a mat. And I think in the Pacific there's beautiful mats. It's about having all the different strands, which are very, very weak when they're by themselves, but when they're woven together, they're really strong. But if you look at a mat, there's no hierarchy in a mat. All the different threads have to be at the same level and they can interconnect at the same level of authenticity. Now, a beautiful friend of ours has woven a mat. It's sitting over there. And I just wanted to finish off by saying perhaps one of the things about localization, if we want to think about it, is not ticking a box, not getting more money, not talking about it loudly, not setting up local offices, but actually thinking the image of how you sit and weave a mat, how you make all the elements stronger together without having a hierarchy. So come and have a look at that beautiful mat. I think we've got a Tanoa on it. Is that right? Sitting there. We've got something. What have we got? Oh, yeah. So Rebecca, they came all the way from the Pacific. Thank you for your afternoon. I'm sorry not everyone got a chance to speak, and my apologies. I know there was a number of other questions online, but I always learned a lot myself. I always find it a great privilege to be able to reflect and talk about these things. I always learn new things. So thank you for being on the learning journey, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. And thank you very much to my fabulous colleague.
Definitely.
Bye.